Coming up on The Daily with me, Neil Patterson, Starmer's choice. With the threat of US tariffs hanging over Downing Street and Brussels, should the Prime Minister prioritise the special relationship over closer ties with the EU?
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, what a few days for international trade. Donald Trump has stuck to his guns and threatened tariffs on Mexico, Canada and China. He's also made noises about the European Union. And as a result, the UK is wondering if we might be next, particularly as the Prime Minister heads to Brussels to forge closer ties with the EU. Sam Coates is Sky's deputy political editor.
In conversations that I have with Downing Street, I almost think, and this is partly how they talk to journalists, that they're kind of not worried enough in a funny way. They believe, as per Keir Starmer, that they can really execute a foreign policy that allows us to get closer to the European Union and closer to Donald Trump's White House. And actually, as it happens, Neil, there's a third prong of what they want to do, get closer to China at the same time as well. And there is a sort of a brass neck about it. There's a sort of an insistence that all these three things can be possible simultaneously, even though the leaders themselves, experts, severely doubt that you can continue to travel in the direction at the same pace with all three destinations in mind.
And maybe, just maybe, they might be right after some positive, if you squint a bit, signals from Trump on the tarmac in Maryland last night.
European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure I think that one can be worked out. But the European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Now, those words, I think that's one that can be worked out, will be seized upon in London, in Downing Street.
That's Mark Stone, Sky News US correspondent.
They will be thrilled with that. It's not exactly wholly positive, but it is something. Because what the UK is desperate for is to be seen as separate from the European Union and to be able to carve out some sort of a deal with America, with Trump's America, that is tariff-free or very, very low tariff, or tariffs maybe on specific areas, but not some blanket tariff.
We'll be picking up with Sam Coates just a little later, but we head to Washington and Mark Stone first. Mark, so how will they be feeling then in Brussels at being described as, I believe, atrocious? I mean, why does Donald Trump think that? I mean, is it just the trade deficit?
Well, some days he says it is. Is it the fact that Europe is not spending enough on defence? Therefore, some sort of a punishment tariff that he's imposing? Or is it something else? I mean, he's talked a lot, Neil, about cars. Most American cars, the sort that I see every day on the streets here in the United States, you cannot buy them in Europe. That irritates Trump. Why not, he says. The reason why not is because, frankly, American cars are not as safe as European cars. The safety standards here are lower. And so Europe, the European Union, over many years, has put up barriers to prevent American goods coming into Europe, precisely because they believe their goods are better, their goods are safer, and they want people to buy European, not American. Now, that really irritates Donald Trump. And there's another thing as well, Brexit. Since the UK left the EU, we released ourselves from all of those regulations, EU regulations. So that potentially is an avenue for Britain to be able to do a deal with the United States. But, you know, we've been talking about trade deals with the United States for ever since Brexit. It's not happened yet.
It isn't the fact that Trump is rather more warm in his words towards the United Kingdom, whilst noting that he still believes that we are out of order. Isn't it just simply because the trade relationship between our two countries is rather more balanced than the trade relationship between the US and EU?
It is more balanced, and he does have a fondness for the UK, and he's, we saw that in his first presidency. But I still think that British government officials are not quite sure where they stand. I can tell you they're nervous because they don't know quite what Trump is thinking. They don't know what's going on inside his mind, and they know that he changes his mind really very quickly. And so I guess the more people ask him, will Britain get a trade deal with the US? Will you tariff Britain? The more it might become a good idea in his head, and the more he might be inclined to do it. So they're very nervous here in Washington, British diplomats, about just what sort of trade deal can be carved out, because Trump's blanket tariff plan to introduce even as low as maybe 5%, 2% tariffs on everything in order to generate revenue, that is really what is worrying the UK, and that would really have a massive impact on the UK economy.
Clearly, Sir Keir Starmer, and he's been very open about it, he wants a closer relationship with the European Union, presumably and predominantly we're talking about trade there. How would that go down with the White House?
Well, it puts him in a massive bind, because it goes back to the point I made earlier. If the UK wants to be aligned more closely with the European Union, then it's got to apply European Union standards. And the European Union standards are precisely why the EU doesn't do a great deal of trade with the United States, because US standards are lower. So what does the UK do? How can it be closer to Europe, but also carve out some sort of deal with the United States? It's going to be very, very hard for Keir Starmer to do both.
Well, it does feel, though, that Sir Keir Starmer might well have done a better job at working out what's going on in the White House, at least if we take what Donald Trump is saying about him. I'm struggling to think of many world leaders that Donald Trump is speaking so positively about.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's somewhat confusing to us, because it was only a few weeks ago that he was being quite critical of the UK. His officials had called the incoming ambassador a moron. Incidentally, that ambassador, Lord Mandelson, arrives this week. The outgoing ambassador, Karen Pierce, just left at the weekend. So big change here. Mandelson is a trade geek. He was the trade commissioner in Brussels many years ago. So of all the criticism about why him, the pushback is always, well, he knows trade. And clearly, as we have seen over the course of this weekend, trade is going to be just such a huge, huge issue. And the fact that Mandelson understands Brussels, understands the way it works there, understands trade, I think that will be very, very useful to them. But to your point, it is a bit confusing. It was only a few weeks ago that they were being rude about the Brits. Elon Musk clearly got it in for Keir Starmer. And so now these I say warm words, they're hardly warm words, but they are something to latch onto when he says, I think something can be worked out with the UK. That's worth latching onto if you are in Downing Street.
Sure, but isn't Donald Trump just saying, look, Keir Starmer has given every indication that he is going to do exactly what I want? I mean, if he doesn't do what Donald Trump wants, we're back to square one, aren't we? Even if there is a close, personal, friendly relationship between the two, Donald Trump thinks that the United Kingdom has a decision to make, us or the European Union.
Yeah, he believes that Keir Starmer is going to be compliant and will choose America over the EU. We'll see how that works out. But it's also true that he can flip on a sixpence very, very quickly. He had Justin Trudeau down to Mar-a-Lago before Christmas. All seemed to be going very well. I think Trudeau might have been somewhat reassured that these tariffs might not happen or would be much smaller. Lo and behold, over the course of the weekend, a genuine trade war has now emerged between two very, very close neighbours.
Back in a moment, our deputy political editor Sam Coates will have the view from this side of the Atlantic.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts. The
The US president is on manoeuvres. The EU is firmly in his sights. just as Sir Keir Starmer tries to forge closer trade relations with our European cousins. Sam Coates is Sky's deputy political editor. Sam, so which way is the PM going to end up turning? To the United States or to Europe?
Well, I think that at the moment, Keir Starmer is trying to pick his way through delicate diplomatic negotiations, incredibly cautious public statements that the UK has made about Donald Trump's White House and their desire to maintain as close a relationship as is possible in this turbulent period of relations and turbulent period of US policies. Look, think of it like this. You've got the US effectively bullying Canada, which is a NATO country, and basically trying to erode their sovereignty. You've got the US effectively bullying Denmark over Greenland and trying to, as it were, take control of a massive swathe of country that is sovereign to Denmark. It would be not completely beyond the bounds of possibility for the UK to be issuing incredibly direct and aggressive demands of the Trump White House that they cease and desist this belligerent and bellicose approach. But Keir Starmer is not doing that. This Downing Street's priority is to try and keep all three prongs of Keir Starmer's foreign policy kind of active. Donald Trump, it looks to me like he is making a kind of we don't have to make a choice style of foreign policy as hard as possible, because he is alighting on the areas where Britain does have a choice, and Keir Starmer is going to make choices between the EU and the US about what he's going to do, and those are the things that Donald Trump is zeroing in on.
Like what?
So, the thing that appears to rile Donald Trump the most is that he wants to be able to sell, export more American agriculture and food goods into the EU. Now, you'll know, Neil, there's a long-standing reason for this, which is that EU foodstuffs have to adhere to certain standards, and American foodstuffs adhere to different standards. And the sort of trade-off is that often American food products are cheaper, but at the same time, I think the Europeans would say that American food standards are lower. Britain does not currently sign up to European standards, but there's a very good chance that they will do. And of course they used to when Britain was part of the European Union. That stopped, but I think Keir Starmer is looking at hitching Britain back up to those EU standards. That is a decision by Keir Starmer to shift the UK closer to the EU and therefore further away from the US in exactly the sort of thing that in an area that Trump actually cares about.
Keir Starmer, of course, off meeting with leaders of the European Union nations today. Isn't it entirely possible, indeed probable, that the European Union will be as tough with the UK, with Keir Starmer, as Donald Trump is currently being with the European Union?
I think actually UK-EU politics have evolved. It's far less aggressive and belligerent than it was in 2016, 2017, 2018. There has simply been a new tone from British governments. The EU referred to a reset happening under the last Conservative Prime Minister. You'll remember that Rishi Sunak struck deals over Northern Ireland and some other things in order to put the relationship on a slightly firmer footing. Labour is continuing that trend. The second reason why there's been a shift in the relationship with the EU and the UK is because of the cornerstone of a role that the UK has played in the conflict in Ukraine.
But on the front pages of some of the newspapers this morning, reports that Emmanuel Macron, French president, is going to stick the boot into Keir Starmer, telling him that his presence at the summit means that Brexit has failed. And it's not all sweetness and light.
No, but I'd very gently try and disentangle words from actions. And, it's a great line from the French that this all shows Brexit has failed. The EU is facing massive battering on tariffs from the US, but the UK isn't. Let me give you an example. At the moment, there are tariffs on cars and electric batteries are imported from China to all of the EU, but not to the UK. Being outside the customs union allows us to have an independent trade policy that being part of the European Union and part of the customs union does not. But it is just a fact that we have a bit more control because we're outside the European Union.
Of course, this is the first time that a British Prime Minister has met, I believe, with all 27 EU heads of state since Brexit. And given we've mentioned the B word there, I suppose that such a meeting doesn't come without a large slice of political risk back at home.
As with all trade policy, everything is a trade-off. No country is fully and entirely sovereign, given it needs other countries to trade with and work with to supply goods and services. And just Keir Starmer will recalibrate exactly where we are on the spectrum. The question is, how much does the hangover of Brexit mean that actually people are able now to go, well, we don't want to go back to that psychodrama, let's just let it happen, or whether or not there are big forces in British politics prepared to kind of unbuckle their Uzis and go for Keir Starmer if he decides that phytosanitary standards must be dynamically aligned with Brussels. Deep breath, sigh.
What then the prospects for a transatlantic US-UK free trade agreement? I mean, I'll say this. Over recent days, I have found myself dwelling on the manner in which Trump speaks about Starmer and the way in which Starmer speaks about Trump. It feels as if there is a bit of a relationship building.
Keir Starmer does seem to have got himself into a pretty special spot. And maybe the prospect of deals for certain American goods will keep that sweet. And so long as that there is a trade surplus with the US. So maybe limited deals, but for a bigger political aim, it could mean that some industries face heavier competition as a result of those deals. Trade deals are far more controversial and complex once you get into the weeds of them than anyone really likes to admit. And there are often big losers domestically from them. But maybe Keir Starmer might assess that in certain areas it's a price worth paying.
Well, let's bring Mark Stone back in at this point. Guys, look, maybe they're not quite yet BFFs, but it does feel like there is a relationship of sorts between Trump and Starmer. And I'm just wondering if the PM might be able to ease the way between the US and the EU. Mark?
Well, he'd love to be. I mean, but I just don't see how you square that one. As we outlined earlier, if you want to be closer to the European Union, you need to conform to their regulations. We didn't want to, which is why we went through the process of Brexit. If you want to conform and have some free trade agreement with the United States or prevent tariffs from being put in place, then you've got to buy their goods and you've got to buy them in bulk. And that's not going to please Brussels. So I just don't know how you crack that one. And that is precisely what trade boffins here at the British Embassy in Washington, and I'm sure pretty much every embassy, are now doing as they panic and work out just how to read Trump.
Sam?
Undoubtedly, if there is a way that Keir Starmer can play nearly honest broker between West and East, he'd jump at the chance. It's a role that Britain has traditionally, historically fitted into rather nicely, but we are outside the European Union. And going back to where we started on this podcast, Donald Trump looks like he wants people to choose. He's like a kind of jealous lover going, are you really with me? And Keir Starmer has to choose who he really fancies.
And as sorry, I've just got so many images going through my head right now. No, but I suppose then, if the question is for Keir Starmer not binary, that he feels that he can deal with the United States and the European Union, the question really is whether or not Donald Trump truly views Sir Keir Starmer as having a binary decision.
I think when it comes to UK-US versus UK-EU, it might just about be possible to paper over the cracks without some great big issue. I think when you introduce the subject of China into the equation, then it starts getting eye-wateringly difficult for Keir Starmer, because it's not just Donald Trump. It's the whole of Congress is united, whether you're Democrat, whether you're Republican, on this subject as well. And I think any nation that is markedly moving towards Beijing is going to come under in the sights of this Washington administration with tricky consequences. And I think that if the US decide that Britain, fine, they can cope with us moving closer to Europe, but they're not sure that they want to see us moving closer to Beijing, given many of them believe that China represents a really existential threat, a serious threat to global order and to US interests, whether or not that might not be the thing that ultimately causes Keir Starmer difficulty.
Mark, Sam, thanks very much. that is your lot for this edition of The Daily. We're back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.